Hello, hello. This was all supposed to be about girls and digital, but we started discussing our motherhood experiences and circles of life and how stuff shoots us off our feet when we least expect it. So tell us, Cheryl, who are you? Who are you in life? There's different identities that we carry, and you're not just a stand for women in digital and transformation of leadership worldwide, but how do you express yourself as what you stand for in this lifetime?
Is that all I have to? That such an easy question. Usually they're much harder. I mean, we talking about the circle of life. I am a mom of 4 kids. My eldest will turn 25 tomorrow. It's like really that's how the whole journey of motherhood began for me 25 years ago. And I have 2 older boys and then a set of twins who are a girl and a boy. So I have 1 daughter and 3 sons. And, I'm not sure whether she added, being the mom of a daughter added to the focus of my work, or I think it was already there, I'm already a feminist, but I guess it gave me more inspiration to, some days I have to say, they're turning 18 this year, her and her brother. So that's also been a very long journey. And sometimes it makes me inspired and sometimes it makes me upset. Like I get kind of dark thinking about, because, despite how hard we work, despite how we differentiate ourselves, despite how we invest in ourselves, the patriarchy is a real thing, and if you miss that first rung, or you hit the glass ceiling, or the elevator doors close on you, or there isn't the chair at the table, it really doesn't matter how talented and outspoken and opinionated you are. Heaven forbid if you're also beautiful from the inside and the outside, either or both. Sometimes it's almost like that's 3 strikes and you're out. Like the more you have to give to society, the harder your path is as a woman. And I'm experiencing that firsthand. And also when I look at my daughter, I just think everything I do is to try to make it so that women don't experience the same stuff that we do individually, right? Like our whole objective is to knock down the barriers, to create awareness, to change the language, change the culture so that others have it easier, and to lessen the suffering, to be honest. So that is really, that's kind of the whole journey of life.
And so it makes me think of, the first time we met may have been maybe 10 years ago in the Brussels bubble, in the circles of the activists who are trying to do exactly this, elevate the circumstances or transform the circumstances in which women are trying to become themselves. And digital is one of those contexts, but it's not just digital. And so looking at that cycle of the policy making rounds and governments that you saw come in and out throughout your career, how do you even stay motivated? That's what I wonder when I speak to these women who've been in the industry for so long, and you see how the stats remain stagnant. Do you feel like there's a point in continued engagement in this because you see a little bit of progress, or it just the activity helps us to at least stay stagnant? Or what is actually the point of doing all these women empowerment in digital activism activities if the progress is so slow? Or would you say that it's not so slow and we're on a good track?
It's a mixed bag. I hate to be so ambivalent, but or unclear. But I would, as the way it looks from the outside in, right? Just tracking the data and the research, it looks really grim. It's true. And as a person who's kind of on the forefront of that, I get a lot of the stories, the anecdotes and the research, and all the time. So you have to be pretty thick-skinned to not get depressed about that. So I think there's a basic nature I have that is very optimistic, maybe to the point of being kind of dumb, like stubborn, so, or a bit nuts, maybe, that, when you just keep going back, regardless of how bad the circumstances are. So this kind of stubborn optimism, but that's mixed with a realism, like a pragmatism. So I look at the statistics, and then I'm always looking for the entry point, like, oh, here's the edge of the wedge where we can do something, But it's true, when you start to pull the thread, you see, oh, the problem is like really big. It just is really big. And that can be overwhelming. So I think you've got to kind of focus on what it is that you can do. But of course, seeing that it's a larger picture thing, that you've got to have, I guess, a community, a posse, places where you can go to kind of reorient and refocus, and remember why you do what you do. It's almost like, for me now that you've seen the beast, it's very hard to unsee it. So you kind of, so
what
the burden is thrust upon you, and you can't change that, really.
Yeah. How do you choose what to do about it? Because, the sky's the limit. Obviously, there's as much as we can do in our lifetime or in 1 year of our career and our businesses. What is exactly the form that you choose to be active in yourself?
Well, just to finish a bit on your last question about, like, what has, how you can stay at it. I do have to say that I see movement. So I want to share that. I'm not just blind optimism, but in European policy in particular, we keep talking about the backlash, but I'm like, let's not even give the backlash airtime. Just ignore it, because everywhere you turn, there will be backlash in minute quantities or big, microaggressions that we face every day, one-on-one, even in our home environments, on TV, things that we're exposed to. And then there's the whole larger system, which is a collective systemic bias, right? But I have to say, from the policy perspective in Europe, and maybe we should keep this to ourselves, everything works on precedence in the policy. And one thing that makes me very optimistic over all these years of doing this work is, of course, the action of the women in leadership. Some of them resent having that thing thrust upon them, like, I'm a woman 24/7. That doesn't mean that I also have to put the mission of women on my plate as well. It's kind of an unfair burden, but yeah, it is kind of thrust upon us. But women in leadership in Europe, generally speaking, are adding to the framework, the policy framework, to make things better for women over the long run. I have seen this progression, and if anyone who cares to, our gender specialists, gender researchers, can also verify that that's the case. So that's a good reason to stay optimistic and keep working. And keep working on the policy from whatever angle interests you. For me personally, it's true that it has really evolved from, as you know, just us meeting today like this, the technology is so critical. It's also the environment where women don't have access or are not as skilled as men or boys and girls. Where the harm is greater, right? This is really a hostile environment, and in politics in particular. So politics, journalism, any kind of leadership and celebrity roles, women get disproportionately mistreated online. And that also, it actually carries over to the lived environment, right? As we see with the psychological impact of this is really on all genders, but on those who identify as girls and women in particular, because of, what the technology can do, from everything from, sexting and these kinds of, or social media, to deep fakes and pornography that, also creates an environment where it is acceptable to persecute and exploit and harm. And that's the thing that I want to.
So that's where
I wanted to say it terrifies me to be honest. It terrifies.
Yes, and
because there's no control over it. Right?
Yes, and that's where the challenge comes for the leaders like yourselves to choose, right? Like, and where is our dharma, where we can contribute to a select parts of the problems that you outlined, because in our lifetime we may not see much of a progress. And so how do you go about choosing what is your to do in all of this for over so many years, where also the industry and the internet has been sort of evolving under our sort of arms? And so how do you choose what's yours?
I just love that you use the word dharma, because I've been I'm a global citizen. I have been a global citizen my entire life, not even by choice, really. I've only, last year, the G20 presidency was in India, and I had the honor of leading the EU delegation for the Women 20. So that was the whole initiative around. And that's interesting, too, because it's a much broader discussion about girls and women, specifically girls and women, not just gender balance, but really about the rights and opportunities and interests of the world's girls and women. And I can say that dialogue has also been very productive, that it's becoming more and more constructive in all of those vertical areas where we have to be busy, and also where we're creating structure, where we can have structured dialogue about feminist, interests. And for me, it's like, it is such a broad set of issues. But the thing that, and my involvement has evolved. But the thing that is most compelling to me right now is women is in democracy, really, women in political leadership, like you right now. This is and that's where the element of the internet and censorship and marginalization and silencing of women and the hate, the hate speech and things that it is very gender based, right? Those things that confront women really does impact our democracy. So this is an area towards which I am turning my attention.
Because it feels like endless conversations, not much money in it. The regulation could be done, but it's not really, the women don't have access to the highest decision-making powers in order to pass the truly breakthrough legislation. So what is it for you that you feel would be the way
policy,
so that 5 years on, the next, now we're a couple of weeks before the European elections, right? And we already see how it's being hijacked by certain forces. So what do you think could happen in the next 5 years, so that in 5 years, with the deepfakes and the AI and everything that we're going to be up against, even worse, how do we even go about it?
This is really, really difficult. There's no one size fits all. But one thing that I'm very happy about is the priority in the digital decade to close the gender gap among IT experts in Europe. So this is an actual articulated goal of the digital decade. And that to me means women tech experts. Why that's like a critical thing for me is particularly around cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, that we really need women who are designing and building, responding to these growing threats around AI from a specifically female perspective. And there is movement on that, like there is the Women in AI group, I think founded under the auspices of UNESCO, I want to say, and, helping build policy from the UN down. You have, of course, the AI Act, but, we don't have enough women policymakers who are feeding into that discussion. And part of that comes from the fact that we don't have enough women IT experts. It's not like a sine qua non. You don't have to be an IT expert to influence tech policy, obviously. But it is one of the big reasons why we kind of lost control of the beast. It's it's kind of telling us to do and then what to do. And then there's also the national security question is we can't tell China what their AI developers can and cannot do. So now you have enclaves around the world that are really, are the engines behind deepfakes for various reasons. Some of them are financial and exploitative. I'd say the majority, in fact, and then there's the whole political discussion. So right now, like my keen interest is actually this issue of women and national security and technology. So I think there's like a whole exposure that we have there. It's very deep rooted. So if there was just the magic wand, one thing I've always dreamt of is enclaves of women cybersecurity experts. And I even have a few models to do it, but it's very hard to get sustained funding around this question.
Yes, exactly.
Women can't just quit their day jobs or leave home, unless they're actually getting paid.
The question of the sort of like the sexiness, competitiveness of state and policy systems as employers. What do they need to offer to these men and women to attract the ones who actually understand the tech and who are passionate about creating change through policy? Because you also, as a mom and as an activist, I mean, you see many talented young people around you and they may have the right skills. What should make them want to go and work for governments if they are so easily hijackable by the amazing work conditions offered by the actual companies, right?
Well, Lucia, the appeal of a career or a job is very different between men and women, and I'm using those gender terms by design. And actually, the conventional wisdom, as we call it, doesn't apply to women because it's very male-centric. The conventional wisdom about jobs and careers. What women, generally speaking, and again, I'm generalizing, right, is look for in a job is that it's sustainable and that it's stable, and opportunities to learn. For example, I know from a large American tech company, but that is very involved, very much part of the ecosystem in Europe as well, that in an innovation center in Belgium, the manager said to me, male manager said, my secret to success is that I hire women disproportionately.
I hear this all the time.
Let them take their time off for, to give them flexibility in their schedules. And they always come back and they do a great job and they're very loyal. And, state jobs tend to be of that nature. So they generally have an appeal for women already. Mm-hmm. So we can make the trade-off, right, between short-term quick wins in income or whatever, and long-term stability in a role. It's just the barriers are actually before that. It's not, should I go public sector or private sector? No, it's like, should I do tech or not? And that's where we lose the girls. So we're not even in the discussion. It would even make sense that women who study technology go into the public sector. It's a win-win kind of thing. But we don't have the machination. We don't have the engines in place to build those cadres of women. That's where the problem lies. And that's the thing that we've expressly been trying to fix for a very long time.
And you know what I wonder, one other area that I would still like to cover with you is EU versus the US. Having worked at the top EU levels in the European bubble for so long, how is your game different now that you're back to the US? How, what are you hearing? What is the also message for the EU? What is it that we could transform in the way we are going about it to transform it more quickly?
There are some really key differences, and obviously the willingness to regulate technology companies is a major differentiator for the EU, although that differentiator is disappearing, right? I remember the days when we had a list, the register of, we even laughed using the term lobbyist, right? 15 years ago in the EU bubble. Now it's no laughing matter, right? It's not a joke at all. So now at least the U.S. lobbyists know they have to be in Brussels. That's one big change. What I see in the context of this discussion, though, is what is the rhetoric that we're hearing around diversity in technology? And in the U.S., the general discussion is very loud. The EU still leads, I would say, as far as the policy framework. Okay, so that's kind of there's not as much noise. It's muffled. There's the difficulty because of the patchwork nature of Europe. So it's hard to get that, the one voice, and one language that is really common here. So it's very noisy, but I don't see the same policy framework in place. It's also very iconoclastic. People look at me and it's like, oh, that's cute. Very cute, your EU experience. So I can't say that it translates from here to there, or from there to here. But what I do see, maybe this is me imposing my own perspective on the discussion, is, the conversations about cybersecurity and artificial intelligence are very close to national security in the U.S. Like, they're not afraid to say these things, not afraid to use that kind of turn of phrase. They also are not afraid to say STEM skills are a national security interest. Can you imagine that in the EU? Also, also competitiveness, to be competitiveness, STEM skills, national security. They're also very happy to make these connections. In the EU, it's getting a little bit more okay, especially confronted with the geopolitical situation we have now, right? But then, here I am, and I've always said, guilty as charged of being an American walking into the EU discussion, and vice versa now, having spent 20 years in Europe and now walking into the US discussion. I'm still kind of a fly on the wall, though, if you can imagine that, because it is a bubble. Washington is also a bubble. So who how long you've been around, they're very suspicious of outsiders, even though I studied here and lived here, before going to Belgium. It's still very, so it's a slow process for me of learning and growing. But I do, like, my perspective on the whole discussion is that the first countries, regions that understand that increasing participation of girls and women in technology is a national security, it is in the interest of national or even regional security, I think they will benefit. So that's all I can say. And I think that perhaps, almost certainly in Russia, this has happened. The penny has dropped, maybe even decades ago. Women, cybersecurity experts, I can totally see that as having. I remember there was such an institute in St. Petersburg, cybersecurity, all women, many years ago. I want to say like a decade ago. I haven't seen anything similar in the EU or in the US. It wouldn't surprise me if China did the same thing, maybe, So I think that's a key message, that again, it's more of what we share than what makes it different, in this transatlantic dialogue. And it's, in fact, for me, a position that I will, a hill that I will die on. I really think that it's a key national and regional security interest to increase participation of women in cybersecurity and in artificial intelligence. And I would like to, as a next step, I would like to be involved in initiatives that are doing that from a transatlantic, or a NATO perspective. And, that's just an area that I'm beginning to look into.
The last question is, what are you saying to young professionals now who are preparing for the careers? Where is it you can create this change? What's your advice to these young people? Go and set up your next digital leadership institute, go into politics, go become a bureaucrat within, I don't know, in NATO, in Washington. Where is it? Where, the new snowflake generation who have patience of 2 weeks, right? Like, they can't, now go studying into something for years and then wait for 10, 20, 30 and to never see the impact of what they're doing. With the acceleration of everything in our world, where is it that we can accelerate the policy impact?
Well, I would rephrase the question, why are we focusing on girls unless we're focusing on girls of all ages? Because I really think mature women are a key demographic that must be involved. So I'm also speaking to you with this message, is like, I think when we there's the intersecting dynamic of age and gender, which really depletes our society of the richesse that women have gained through our lives, in all the facets of what we do. And that's, why women in leadership is such a key, critical success factor for society. And why and even though, and because of those two issues, the sexism and the ageism, so much is going wrong, honestly, and it's hard. I would say the ageism barrier in the US in particular, it's really, really difficult. It's more difficult than anywhere, the focus on youth, but it's a bit of the same in Europe. So that's one thing that we have to get over is like, we need to start embracing women leaders across the board who are of a certain maturity and target programs of skills development of all different kinds. So from digital skills and expert skills to policy to whatever. And, it's also about pushing them off the cliff if necessary, because I think we're also socialized to not take on those challenges. But imagine the impact of having, 50% of the EU Parliament of, middle-aged women. That would be freaking amazing. I mean, and what we could accomplish with that kind of difference in and that kind of representation. So that's a goal I think we should have. So, turning the tables a bit, we also have to focus on mature women. Speaking to young girls, and I have this 18-year-old girl. I'm the last person she listens to now, right? That's going to be fun when your daughter's a teenager. So you've got to be brainwashing them as much as you can until they become tweens, because then you will not be heard. Her teachers will not be heard. It's like maybe teachers, it's at that point, right, where we need our young women to be listening to the experience of the previous generation is the moment that they are going to do it on their own. It's just arrogance. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's but it means that each generation we lose all of that wisdom, and I think it's why sexism persists too, because we don't, keep the, and it's very difficult to keep those ties in place. So that's advice number one. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, or don't throw out your mom with the bathwater when you start making those critical life decisions, which, by the way, they happen by the age of 15 for girls and boys. These PISA tests that we follow all the time, girls track towards the so-called soft sciences and boys towards the hard sciences, and then you're pretty much fixed for your whole life. So my advice around that is really don't close doors. Girls really are good at STEM, but they get socialized away from it. And I always say to young women, don't study the stuff that you know. Women are the natural educators, the natural caretakers, of course, the natural communicators, the natural diplomats, the natural doctors even, right? We just assume those roles. If you go on a playground, you see the girls they're natural leaders in all those areas, right? So don't study stuff that you're good at already. Study the stuff that you don't know. So this is why I really push technical skill sets that, where you can have a technical set of expertise and wrap that in those kind of native talents that you have as a woman. And unfortunately, like I said, with my own daughter, I have middling success, I would say. We will see. The jury's still out. She's still making decisions about this. But younger girls, I think often if you talk to them about, one, it's very hard to hear even for us, but if you talk about the retirement gap, that even in the EU is 30%, right? So even in the EU where everything's socialized, including retirement, women earn 70 euro cents on the euro that men earn. Yeah. And that's because we take lower paid jobs for more flexibility. We get paid less for the same work. We take time off to assume those unpaid caregiving roles at home, so at all of the, I looked at it as a luxury. Yes, this is a message to you too. I thought, this is a luxury that I get to take off time and be at home. But no, it's all those things, like I said, about the conventional wisdom around career choices. What they tell you applies to men, not to women. Yep. I've even reverse engineered women in leadership, and they stay in the same place. 15, if you want to see women who are leading Fortune 100 companies, for example, they don't change jobs to move ahead. No, they stay put. And you're like the bad penny that keeps turning up. Eventually, you cannot be denied. That's the thing. So longevity, they tend to have a lot of kids or no kids. So that's the other thing. And then, there's there's some other things, but those are the two big ones.
We'll cover those in our next episode.
Next conversation, we can talk about
I feel research. I've been sitting here and just listening to absorbing. It feels like being around these wise women. There's so much like wealth of wisdom that you've accumulated over years, and I'm very grateful to always be in your presence and listen to. It's sort of like coming from all areas, and it's very interconnected and very big, and we could go on for hours, but we don't have time anymore. So thank you very much, Cheryl, and I'd love to continue at some point.
Thank you for having me. Let's do it. I'm at your disposal anytime. Good luck. I'm rooting for you. I can't wait. I cannot wait to see you in the Parliament. Let's go.
Thank you for listening. For follow-up, you can find us on all major podcast platforms and all social media platforms, including our Instagram, Lights on Europe. So feel free to go there now and leave us your review, likes, feedback, as well as tips on who would you like to hear interviewed next time. Bye!